Audio check. Good. As soon as we're good with the selfies, we will get started, because that is the name of the game. That's important today. All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending our press conference with elected officials to protect America in conjunction with the Scottish government and ICLEI. And we appreciate the Scottish government and ICLEI for hosting us here and their partnership. We also want to remember that tomorrow is Remembrance Day and Veterans Day in the United States. And of course, today is the Marine Corps birthday, so hurrah. Over 400 lawmakers have come really from across America together to show the importance of the national security and declaring a climate emergency declaration because of our security, our health, and our prosperity, not just in the US, but internationally. And the focus of this press conference is really on international security. And this really came to bear with myself when I was in the Marine Corps, and I was deployed out to Iraq. And it was one of those days where the rifles were so hot, it'd be like putting your hand in the coals. And unfortunately, someone tried to blow our vehicle up. What we found, though, in the investigation as the dust was clearing and we caught the person, was that he was a farmer who had been paid by Al-Qaeda to plant the roadside bomb because his crops had failed due to climate change. And this really woke me up to the dangers of climate change, how it was both affecting our security, his family's security, and millions and billions of people across the United States. I then was elected to the Maine state legislature and started working on this issue and met amazing lawmakers from across the US who are dedicated every day to ensuring that we are protecting our planet's health and security. So I'm going to pass the mic now on to our lawmakers here. But first, we want to play a short video that illustrates the importance of why we need to safeguard our international security when it comes to climate change.
We're looking today at an opportunity, national climate plan, and an emergency declaration.
My vehicle was hit by a roadside bomb. Fortunately, the guy who did it wasn't very good at his job, and we were able to
bear with it while we do the technical. But one thing I will say, unfortunately, in today's world with Afghanistan, I was there in 2018, and right now there's a massive
crops
drought
have failed
happening
due to a massive drought because of climate change.
And so when people need water, they will be looking for water. They will not observe, international borders for it. If they can't feed themselves, they would try to find how to feed themselves, whether it's through illegal or illicit manners, like we just heard. There are global actors, both are, state actors and even non-state actors that will use that human suffering to their advantage. So we know the geopolitical consequences of climate change. We require the Pentagon to create a climate roadmap to improve the DoD resiliency and assess various climate vulnerabilities. And when we do that on the armed services, it's a statement of fact that it's something that we are worried about.
Climate change is a threat multiplier for instability, both on and at home. We see that every day now, from devastating wildfires to extreme hurricanes and weather events across our Gulf of Mexico, to flooding in the Midwest and beyond. And this is putting the lives of all Americans and our soldiers and their airmen and Marines at risk on a daily basis.
It's not just the risk of inaction that's going to cause us a challenge. It's a missed opportunity under the president's Build Back Better plan and the legislation in front of Congress now. That action can drive not just billions of or trillions of dollars of investments into new technologies and into new solutions, but it'll create good paying jobs here at home for all Americans, and especially for veterans like myself who are mission oriented and moving into this industry as we speak.
I believe that every generation is given a choice, whether you're going to stand up and answer the call of the time that you live in, or whether you're going to let somebody else. I think we really can. It's going to take leadership at all levels of government.
It's my personal opinion. It is also the opinion of most of the national security leaders that this is the most important threat that Americans face and the world faces right now.
Great. As that video showed, our national security experts across the United States are taking this extremely seriously. And we'll see from others at this press conference too, their personal experiences where they had seen how our national security and climate security are interacting. But I'd like to pass it now to a distinguished panel, starting with President Sharp, who's president of the Native American Congress. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. On behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, I represent 574 sovereign tribal nations across the United States. And we are incredibly honored to join our friends, allies, and partners here from the United States, as well as our partners globally. The world is beginning to recognize that the indigenous peoples of this planet bring something special to the table, that we are not weak and vulnerable, that in fact we are strong, resilient, and we stand on centuries of wisdom, knowledge that is necessary to solve this climate crisis. There is no way we're going to be able to negotiate our way out of this, legislate our way out of this, or certainly buy our way out of this crisis. We must reconcile our life ways to our traditional values of having balance with the ecosystem and the natural world. So we thank Special Envoy Kerry for acknowledging and recognizing that the future of this planet and the future of humanity is inextricably tied to indigenous peoples having a voice and a seat at the table. So on behalf of the tribes in the United States, we are so very grateful for this opportunity. We've also been leading in the state of Washington on carbon pricing mechanisms. We've long recognized the scale of this crisis is beyond the public treasury. The $32 billion that was announced in early August is only paying for the symptoms of climate change, the mega fires, the hurricanes, the tornadoes. If we are truly to address this crisis, we must hold the fossil fuel industry accountable by not only pricing carbon emissions going forward, we must look back at the centuries of environmental degradation and sue the fossil fuel industry for atmospheric injustices. They have been getting away with this far too long. And if we are going to achieve the necessary resources to survive as a people, as a planet, we must ensure that those who are directly responsible are held accountable. So not only are they complicit, but they continue to wreak havoc, and they need to be held accountable. So on behalf of our tribes and the indigenous peoples that we represent globally, thank you for this opportunity, and we stand ready, and we are honored to be here at COP26 and look forward to continued work. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'd love to pass the mic to Senator Murdoch from North Carolina.
All right. Hello, everyone. Senator Natalie Murdoch out of North Carolina, and I'm honored to be here today with elected officials to protect America. Recently joined their leadership council, having phenomenal conversations and exposure here at COP26. In North Carolina, we have a huge military presence. So I think that EOPA gets it right with sharing that there is a national security concern that we have around our energy, and that is very relevant to the conversation we're having here today. And honestly, we've already heard that theme here at the conference, that we really do have to work globally so that we can reduce and end our dependency on fossil fuels. And it is a direct correlation to our national security in the US. So that directly links to our efforts to make sure that we are combating climate change as much as we possibly can. We all know that we recently did have an infrastructure bill to pass in my state of North Carolina, I believe, that will result in a little over $100 million to go towards EVs, some work towards transit, but we have so much farther to go. We still have to work to get the full Build Back Better bill passed and signed into law. That is the legislation that has the true long-term investments that we will need to truly combat climate change. And again, we are here in Scotland at COP, and for 4 years, we have not been that world leader that we should have been. We have to come back strong, and the only way to do that is with the investments provided in Build Back Better. And we also implore President Biden to sign a climate change emergency the time for that is now again, if we want to ensure the world that we are a world leader and that we're serious about combating climate change, being a huge, contributor to the issues that we're currently facing to now have been for decades. The right thing to do is for us to lead with declaring a emergency, as well as financially providing the support that we'll need for those solutions. And in closing, just want to add that for communities of color, this is also at the top of our list. A lot of those low-lying vulnerable areas are more subjected to flooding and cause migration within the state. So we're all here together, and it's going to take a multi-pronged effort over some years, and we have to come together globally, but as well as nationally, to get on the same page and to move forward with real solutions and strong legislation like the Build Back Better Act. Thank you.
Well said. I'm now going to pass the mic to Delegate Young from Maryland.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Delegate Pat Young from the Maryland General Assembly. I represent an area outside of Baltimore City, and I'm the chair of the Baltimore County delegation. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to share the stage with so many prominent folks that care about the environment, care about the earth, and recognize that this is the place for these conversations to have. I share my colleague from North Carolina, Senator Murdoch's comments related to the fact that this is a timely crisis that we need to address, not just on an individual state level, but at a national level. We're here, one, to thank Congress for passing the first part of the Build Back Better plan, but remember that there is still another piece that needs to be addressed that addresses climate change. When you look at what's left and what needs to be done, our individual states can benefit from the second half of the Build Back Better Act that would help us reach our individual goals, that then help us reach our collective goals. I'll mention that Maryland has every state has its relationships with the environment. Maryland has the Chesapeake Bay as a huge watershed that has an impact on multiple different states. We've pushed at a state level to make sure that we're reaching our climate action goals by 2030, reducing our necessary or our needs for vehicles and needs for our bringing down our emission standards to what they were back in 2006. We have been fighting for this for a long time, and I'm excited to say that in the next session, the 2022 session, it will be a priority to pass legislation that helps us meet our goals, reevaluate where we've been so far, and making sure that we reach our goals by 2045. I will share that, just like Alex had mentioned, when he was in Afghanistan and seeing the direct results of climate change on the population, how it affects our national security. When I served in Iraq, same thing. The effects of climate change affect the ability for access to water, the ability for folks in other nations to raise crops, which isn't a theory about whether it's our national security. It's already been defined as a national security threat, and we've already seen the impact. You can link the Arab Spring that happened in 2010 back to droughts, back to the lack of exports for certain food distributions from Russia and other areas that then led directly to the riots in the Arab Spring in the Middle East. And the last thing when closing, I just want to mention that I've heard some of my colleagues at the federal level mention about the cost of some of these things and how complicated it would be to achieve these goals. I just want to point out that in the 1980s, the United States led the way in creating a international agreement to bring down pollution and eliminate the use of CFCs from the environment, which still stands to date as the #1 most successful international treaty related to environmental change ever to protect our ozone, and was successful. We've done it then, we can do it again, and I look forward to working with colleagues into the future to see that happen again. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say happy birthday as a fellow 03 in the Marine Corps here. Hoorah. Next, we have Director Katz from California.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm Andy Katz. I'm a director at the East Bay Municipal Utility District. We serve 1.5 million people in the East Bay of San Francisco's Bay Area. And I'm here at COP26 because it is time to take action on climate change. Climate change is already here. It's affecting California very severely in the second driest year on record that we've experienced. We need to make sure that we are able to take bold action on climate because we are in the 4th year of consecutive wildfires. Climate change is hitting the Bay Area and California hard. So it's important that we see big changes. I know my agency has taken action by committing ourselves to a zero emissions future. We've set a target for our water operations to emit zero emissions by procuring only renewable energy going forward, to make sure that we're procuring zero emissions auto fleet. We're a part of partnering with other governments to make sure that we're procuring zero emissions heavy duty vehicles. And I call on Congress to help us do the same. This is the time to double down on these efforts by passing the Build Back Better Act. By passing the Build Back Better Act, we can have a clean energy future for the entire United States. We can transition to 100% renewable energy with technologies that already exist, with smart grid, with solar, with wind, with batteries. We are able to get there. We are able to get there with renewable and with additional incentives for vehicles, by transitioning our vehicle fleet to move away from dirty fossil fuels and to transition to clean electric vehicles, to look at other alternatives like sustainable hydrogen when it's appropriate. These are the technologies that the Build Back Better Act is able to help us achieve. And it's beyond time for Congress to help us get there.
Thank you, Andy. That's extremely well said. We're now going to transition to the Zoom section of this, right? So this is a hybrid technology and in person, which actually is pretty amazing because we've had delegates here who were at COP but had to go home to work with their constituencies. So what we're going to do is pass it now to the audience on our Zoom channel through the webinar and hear from them. But as a side note for the media out there, please feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll see them here and I can read them out. Or we'll just raise your hand in the room when we get to the Q&A panel. And if you're watching it on the feed, please tweet at us at EOPA America. And the A is a part of America, at EOPA America. And then I can see the question here and relay it to our audience. So the panelists, if you can now put on your exquisitely looking accessories and we can proceed with the folks on Zoom. I'm starting with Arizona State Senator Pulaski. And she's a Native American with the Navajo tribe.
Hello, this is Senator Pulaski. Hello, I am Senator Jamesita Peshlakai, and I'm coming to you from my home in Cameron, Arizona. And you know, one of the things that as Native Americans, we have lived on this earth directly forever and ever. And we are very concerned about the environment and how this Build Back Better plan would help all of us is that many of our communities in Indigenous America have never had access to infrastructure. So this would lay a foundational base for all of us to move towards climate justice. Furthermore, we believe in Mother Earth. She will continue to exist forever. Father Sky, Mother Earth, Father Sun, Mother Water, they will continue to exist. But at this time, it is up to our people, the five-fingered people, human beings, to decide what is the value of their species, what is the value of moving forward and continuing to exist. That is the decision they have to make. And that decision needs to be made now. And we believe that right now is the time to make these hard choices. We don't have any more time to sit on the sidelines and wring our hands. The United States continues to be a leader and must lead with the path forward in making those decisions on the use of water, the use of land and resources, and security, food security in the future. And these are the things that the Build Back Better plan will start to address. And I'm looking forward to the future, because right now we are creating the path forward. And And I thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Senator Peschelkai. What you said about the hope for the future, I think is unbelievably important and something for us to keep in mind when we hear all the damages and fear, because as elected officials here are creating those opportunities in partnership with our NGOs and business communities across the world. We'd love to now move to Debbie Sariana, who's a New Mexico State Representative.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. I am New Mexico State Representative Debbie Sariana. Every day, millions of people face the clear and present dangers of climate crisis. New Mexico's climate is getting hotter and drier. Our droughts and fires are more intense. Spring comes earlier, summer is extremely hot, and our winters are more rain than snow. From 2010 to 2020, New Mexico experienced 14 extreme weather events, costing almost $5 billion in damages. And those costs don't portray the emotional costs and the heartache from families who suffer these disasters. 2 of my children are military, one former and one current, and I couldn't be prouder. At the same time, I'm concerned, for I know that climate crisis drives conflict and instability. I don't want to see any more deployment that result from wars born from climate change events. On this Veterans Day and Remembrance Day Eve, let us not only give thanks to those who gave everything to defend democracy, let us pledge to never forget and hope our military will not be called again to action. Let us instead wage the war that is necessary, a war on climate change. As allied countries became united in World War II, we can and must unite again and put the same concerted effort behind our actions. We must come together with the united mission and grow a global clean emergent energy economy. In New Mexico, we're fortunate to have a governor, legislature, and congressional delegation that have developed supportive clean energy policies to make a clean energy future possible. But we need a presidential climate emergency declaration based on the fact that climate change is a national security threat. The Build Back Better Act is about to be voted on. It will cut pollution in half by 2030, establish millions of good-paying clean energy jobs. It represents the largest single investment of more than $550 billion that will protect our environment and economy by cutting the carbon pollution that drives climate change. The Build Back Better Act will also create a new civilian climate corps based on FDR's Civilian Conservation Corps that built our nation's parks. President Biden's Civilian Climate Corps will enlist a diverse generation of Americans in conserving our public lands, bolstering community resilience, and addressing the climate change, all while growing a clean energy economy. Worldwide renewables are the cheapest form of power in most places, which is 38% of the global total. Continued investment could drive the numbers to 74% by 2050. But we know this is not fast enough to avoid catastrophic climate disaster. Governments that promote investment in clean energy economy will invigorate this growth. And America can show the way with the passage of the Build Back Better Act. Let's not miss this historic opportunity to meet humanity's code red. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. I do want to acknowledge your service in the Air Force. I think that some of us are modest, so thank you very much. And also, Senator Peschelkai, your service in the Army. I really appreciate all the veterans here being here to highlight this issue, particularly on Remembrance Day and Veterans Day coming up forward. Next, we'd love to talk to Senator Faith Winter in Colorado.
Hi, everyone. It is excellent to be here with you all today. I just returned from COP26, spending the last week having phenomenal discussions about what we can do to address a climate emergency. And we're very intentionally saying it's a climate emergency. It's not something that is going to happen in the future. It is something that's happening right now in our everyday lives. It's impacting our first responders. We're asking our firefighters to fight fires that are longer and hotter and more dangerous. It's impacting our farmers and those that care for the land and changing what they can plant, when they can plant, what our land is capable of growing. It's impacting our economy. Colorado has been devastated by the impacts of climate change on our tourism, our agriculture. We've been spending billions of dollars responding to this emergency. This year, we had to drain our reservoirs in order to honor the Colorado River Compact. Those are reservoirs that we usually fish and boat and recreate on. It's decimating our habitats in Colorado. But I am eternally optimistic that we can come together, and we can come together as a world and as a nation and as a country. It's time to do the hard things, make the hard decisions, and work hard together. And that's why I'm optimistic about Build Back Better. I'm optimistic that through international cooperation, we can phase out fossil fuels, that we can declare a climate emergency in Colorado. As a local elected official and a state official, I've worked diligently to make sure that we are reducing our carbon pollution, we're reducing greenhouse gases, all the while having a just transition that's taking care of our communities and creating jobs across the state. We can do that across the country, and we can do that across the world. And while we are coming together to solve this emergency, we also must center the voices of disproportionately impacted communities and hold environmental justice as a key goal. Those frontline communities that have historically dealt with more pollution, taken on more health risks, need to be put first and center in this discussion and make sure that they have equal risk and equal reward in the solutions that we move forward. It's time to declare an emergency and listen to those that we know talk about what an emergency is. Over 100,000 nurses and doctors have signed on asking for us to phase out from fossil fuels and move towards 100% renewable energy. I look forward to working with all the panelists, everyone that attended COP26, because it's only together that we can truly find all the solutions to address this climate emergency. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. We'd like to move west now to Oregon, where Representative Paul Evans, an Air Force veteran, will talk about his state.
Thank you for having me here. I also just returned from Scotland after spending about a week meeting with folks, listening, learning. I want to say three things today and hopefully not take too much of your time. The first is that we must have the president declare a climate emergency as soon as possible. I say that because ultimately Americans in general and politicians in specific will only deal with issues when there is in fact an emergency. And right now, one cannot deny wildfires, unseasonably and larger and growing hurricanes, all types of changes in terms of what we can predict based on the past. It doesn't take a rocket scientist at this point to realize that our world is on fire and our planet is dying. So we either are going to care enough to do something, or we're going to be complicit in the extinction of our species. And I, for one, am not willing to say it's time for us to leave the stage. We have to come together. We have to recognize what can be done. We have to do it as soon as possible. That means starting with a presidential climate emergency declaration. It means passing the Build Back Better Act as a beginning down payment of $550 billion toward environmental recovery, mitigation, and response. It also means making it personal. I spent 20 years in the military, and I've seen too many people be sent to wars over energy and other natural resources that, quite frankly, had we been smarter about how we run our government, we wouldn't have had to send. And given that it is Veterans Day and Remembrance Day, I think it's fitting and proper for us to recognize that we can do better than we have. So in Oregon, we have taken some concrete steps in the absence of leadership that occurred over the last 4 years. We have moved forward with the governor's executive order. We have moved forward with legislation, but it's time for the nation to come together in common cause. It's time for the world to come together in common cause and meet our challenges head on. So I implore that everybody that can hear this recognizes the time for talk is over. It's time for action. Thank you for all of you who've been a part of this. And thank you in advance for all of you who are about to become a part of the greatest opportunity of humanity to save our species or bust.
Thank you, Paul. I couldn't be more said that the time for talk is over and the time for action is now. And the action is being done at the state and local level that we've seen from our delegates, representatives, and senators here, and presidents. So now we have some time to take some questions. So we'll first go to the audience, and then we'll take some from the Zoom. And again, if you need to tweet it, EOPA America. Gentleman in the far back. Sir. We're going to bring a mic to you so you can hear it.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here and, adding your voices to the many voices, especially from the global south, but also from all other places for climate action. My perception of the situation is that an increasing number of people is switching from speaking about climate change and global warming towards climate crisis and then to climate emergency. And now we're here calling for a climate emergency declaration. And my question to you is, what are the actions that you would consider appropriate reaction in such an emergency? Because the mainstream thinking in the climate space in the last decades has been about slow transitions, transformations, 2050. That's a very long-term thinking. That is, we could even think that many countries signed onto the Paris Agreement because they said that's so far out that doesn't really affect my what I'm going to do, especially in the fossil fuel industry in the next couple of years. So if we are calling this a climate emergency, then which avenues for action are you foreseeing as appropriate? Is it central bank action, like in a climate bailout that colleagues have proposed, or which avenues are there, and how does that translate also to your local constituencies getting off fossil fuels? Is that a question you would consider working on? How fast, 2030? What are the kind of time frames for such an emergency reaction? Thank you.
So just raise your hand if you'd like to take the question. And for those on the digital side, there's a digital hand you can raise.
Thank you. I really appreciate that question. And the action that's necessary is all of the above. We need to ensure that governments act to declare appropriate states emergency. We also need to hold industry accountable to pay for the massive resources necessary for adaptation and mitigation strategies. We're just simply not going to be able to get these resources from the public treasury. And it's going to require global action that's aggressive, inclusive, and strategic, because we are running out of time.
I'd like to pass it to Representative Evans, who has raised his digital hand.
Thank you very much. I believe that there are 4 things that could be done within the next year or 2 if the president actually saw it as an emergency worthy of a declaration. The first is, if you recognize what an actual disaster declaration does, it frees up the federal government and the state governments to do things that otherwise they couldn't do because of other priorities. What that means is, if a company is good in building a particular widget, instead of going through a 2 or 3 year process to find out whether it's right or whether it's a fair competition, et cetera, the government can actually direct the construction of things. So in that particular mindset, with the World War II lens on, we could actually reform and reprioritize our industrial base to be able to build things that we know they can build, but right now they're looking for a profit margin. So number 1, we can actually mobilize the industrial base of the United States toward a sustainable and environmentally focused effort. Number 2, we could have a global, especially in the United States, national billions and billions of trees planting program that actually helps nature begin the process of healing itself. We're going to try to do 1 billion trees in Oregon. That's one of our bills coming up in 2023, but a national figure of 40 to 50 billion trees would be a little bit of a game changer. Number 3, we can actually encourage states to play to their strengths and subsidize the transition from petroleum fuels to non-petroleum fuels. We're actually working on that in Oregon with something called renewable diesel. It is the same combination, the same chemical combination as petroleum diesel, but it doesn't involve dinosaurs. It involves banana peels and other natural types of things. If we truly unlock innovation with the money and the national will, and that's the fourth thing we need to do, when Americans and the globe come together, there's nothing that can stop us. But until we recognize this an emergency, other priorities like profitability and perhaps even regionalism and sometimes even partisanship can get in the way. It's time for that nonsense to be pushed aside. It's time to recognize we're in the fight of our species' lifetime. And those are the four things that I think we could do in the near term if we made this a priority.
Thank you. Gentlemen? He's going to pass the mic.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
All right. So my name is Amalin. I first want to say, like, congratulations, good job. It's thanks for having this session. But my question is more specific about the technology. So like the different things that you all have mentioned with like the different types of fuel, different forms of like batteries and energy storage and things like this that you all have been talking about, all this new technology. A lot of this tends to use rare earth materials or rare earth minerals and things like this. So is there anything within like the discussion that you all have been talking about which addresses the issues of actually getting rare earth minerals? Because in my region, in Malaysia, Indonesia, things like this, there's a lot of extractivism where people are being exploited, the land is being exploited because we need these rare earth minerals. Like rare earth minerals are essential towards a lot of the technology advancement and the things that are needed for building like all the different technology systems that you guys have been mentioning. So is there anything within this that addresses these kind of issues? Because there's a lot of exploitation in the mining of rare earth materials. And if we don't address this issue, I don't think moving forward with all these new technologies, we're not solving the problem. We're kind of shifting the issue from fossil fuels then towards mining of rare earth materials. And is there like a sort of idea or talk or something that is going to address this? Because if we don't address this now, it's just going to become an even bigger problem than it already is right now.
Actually, with the EOPA, we do a lot of documentary work to educate lawmakers, the media, and the public across the United States. And one of the videos that we're looking at doing is particularly on rare earth extraction and some of the new technology coming out with it. And the Department of Energy is investing in lithium extraction while creating geothermal energy. And that technology looks extremely promising. So it's a symbiotic effort. We're not destroying lands. We're able to do this and create the minerals we need that are vital for batteries, at the same time generating clean energy and protecting the lands. So that's one thing that is being used to work and move forward. It's still a challenge in many areas, particularly in Nevada and others, because it hasn't been shown to protect the native lands as well as it can. And there's still work to do, but there is amazing potential and technology out there that we need to invest in. And that's where it gets back to the Build Back Better Act and others to ensure that we are doing that. Representative Young?
And I just wanted to make sure that I recognize that the importance of your question is that in order to get to net zero, in order to get away from fossil fuels completely, it's going to take a global effort to make sure that we're not focusing on one piece and creating another problem in the process. I just wanted to make sure that thank you for bringing the issue up, because rare earths is just as much of a national security threat related to where we're receiving certain resources, as is our focus on trying to fight the climate crisis. So I just thank you for bringing that to our attention. And as Alex mentioned, the Build Back Better plan and this focus on where they come from. We only solve this by working globally and working together on this, not one nation at a time, which is part of the reason that we're here now. And I welcome the input and the perspective on that. Thank you.
So I'm going to take a question from online now. And this question really gets to the heart of COP in many ways. So how can the average global citizen do their part in climate change? Or does the majority of the responsibility fall on world leaders and polluting corporations? Someone like to jump into that one?
Yeah, that is a really, really big question. But I think the first step I'll take, because I do enjoy this question. I was a transportation planner in another life. And actually years ago, models have shown a lot of it is a lot of working to combat climate change is a part of changing culture of individuals. Not all of it, but it is a lot of it. I mean, I've seen models where just learning how to drive differently can have a huge, huge impact in addition to long-term phasing out fossil fuels. But there are things that we can do as individuals. But we are here at COP because it will take us working together with every nation on this planet. So this is, a very unique convening where you have, so many different, nation states that come together. And we also view our role as, subnational bodies that we also have to look at the units that are smaller than countries, because you have to add up everything that we're doing at the local level. And even mayors, in the US, when we did not have a federal partner, it was our mayors, it was our counties that had to step up to the plate. And when you look at cities such as, New York, they're actually larger than some other countries. So I do think it's a combination of all of the above. But the buck definitely does not stop with the individual. It really, really does come to what can you do, as a nation through legislation, which is why we keep bringing up the Build Back Better Act. Is we do have to act nationally in the states. But thank you for mentioning corporations. I actually was just listening to a session where you had the CEO of Volvo and DHL and all of these global partners, not only to change their policies, but they're also laboratories for innovation and funding. They can pay for things and help us to really fund that cutting edge technology. So it really does take the work of all of us continuing to come together. But as governments, we also have to do our part to make sure that private industry is regulated properly, but that we also provide streamlining for those technologies to get those to market as well.
Right. Senator Winter, did you have anything to add?
Sure. I think it's really important to remember that while individual action is essential, because we have to all come together, and reducing our own individual carbon footprint is a good place to start, but we aren't going to actually see the dent that we need in ending our reliance on fossil fuels and reducing carbon pollution and other greenhouse gases without systemic change. But that doesn't mean individuals not taking action, because the only thing that's ever created systemic change has been by citizens coming together with decision makers, with technology makers, with governments, and acting together and coherently. And so as an individual, yes, try to reduce your carbon footprint, but also ask yourself, what can I do to change systems? And that means contacting your local elected officials, from your mayor to your city councilors, your state representatives, national leaders, international leaders. What can you do to do that? What can you as an individual do to drive corporate responsibility in how you're communicating with corporations and where you're deciding to spend that money? Because it's that collective action that is going to create real change. And then the most important thing that an individual can do is to bring others along and share why we have to declare a climate emergency and how we can take action together. I think oftentimes when we talk about climate emergency, it seems very doom and gloom that all these problems are happening, but tell the stories of success, of where we came together and we passed good legislation to reduce greenhouse gases, and bring people along, because at this point we need to build a movement. And we build a movement by telling our stories to each other and highlighting success stories, being eternally optimistic, because people won't remember what you did. They're not going to remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. So give people urgency and optimism to come and change systems together with us.
It's a very important reminder. Do we have any other questions in the audience? Sir.
Hi. So what we've seen in the UNFCCC process is that there has been greater and greater emphasis on South-South collaboration, and that has been very successful. So countries collaborating with each other on technology transfer, on forming blocks, politically on a policy level, on ground level, organizational level, on civil society level, and the US is it's a group of many economies, whether at city level, at state level. So do states also collaborate with each other? Because we can wait for the federal government to act to declare an emergency, but states have a lot of economic power, as I understand. So is there a framework, is there a structure in which cities and states work together on goals, and also so that they don't cannibalize each other? And what role does local politics play in that process? How much does that contribute or detract from the effort towards sustainable development in particular?
Thank you for the question. I think that it's critical to have that capacity building and that support from countries and communities that have already found many of these opportunities to be able to reduce our emissions, to reduce our carbon footprint, and to become more sustainable. In fact, my agency, East Bay Mud, we learned from communities in Italy and Germany how to develop anaerobic digestion of our wastewater gas and our food scraps. We had to learn from European Union member states and local communities to be able to get our programs running 20 years ago. And I will certainly pledge to work with any network that is seeking that kind of technical capacity for my local agency. I know that within our fiscal limits, we do need a broader network to be able to expand this through nodes. Unfortunately, that framework is not really established right now. I do think it's important to recognize all of the wonderful work that the host of this pavilion has done, ICLEI, the International Local Environmental Initiatives organization. They have done so much to help local governments communicate with each other. We need that to be more resourced. We do need the United States to fund that capacity building and involve local governments to have that technology transfer, because my agency has figured out much of how to run a municipal wastewater facility, and how to capture methane, a potent greenhouse gas that we can help other communities learn how to operate more sustainably. We need to keep doing more of that.
And also just to also add the one piece where communication and partnerships between states absolutely happens, has been happening. And just coming from Maryland, where we have the Chesapeake Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay watershed goes all the way up to New York. We have Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, that we have certain, we've been mandated to meet certain environmental requirements associated with the Bay, but we can't do it as one state. We have to work with our partners and their legislatures so that we meet our own mandates that have been presented by the EPA and by the federal government. So they do exist. And in terms of what you're talking about, we can take those models that we've already used and been successful in meeting those goals and apply them to these new ways of how we need to partner and these new ways to think of it. And we've done it before. I know that we can do it again. So
we'll do one more here, and then we'll get to the online folks.
Thank you. I really appreciate that question. When the United States pulled from the Paris Accord, there's a group of subnationals all across the country that said, despite that fact, and notwithstanding that fact, we are still in. And so we had over 1,300 businesses, over 160 state and local governments, colleges, faith-based universities, and tribal nations. And so there's tremendous will within the United States, and that's represented here all across the country, that recognizes that with or without state actors, we are going to do the work that's necessary on the ground at the local level and work strategically together to ensure that we meet those goals. And that is something that you will find the average citizen in the United States is very committed to that. And we support leaders, and it's been part of many debates, but we are not only still here, but we are still in.
Great. Representative Evans?
Yes, thank you. To address the question, I think
United States, it's not a surprise to anybody, and I don't think I'll be offending any of my colleagues when I say the United States is right now struggling with how to manage a democracy, how to manage a republic when a quarter of the people, for a number of reasons, have checked out in terms of believing in science, collaboration, or anything other than something that can answer a question in the no more sentences or no more words than a bumper sticker. And the fact of the matter is the states are struggling. That said, because we are a diverse country, because we do have a lot of different perspectives in terms of how to achieve things, the states, many of the states have stated, and actually California, Washington, Oregon routinely work together on developing policies. We share strategic priorities. How we get there sometimes are different. There are a number of actors, both government and non-governmental actors, that bind us together in moving forward. The thing I'd like, I guess, folks to know about the United States is that we have about a 55-45 average of Americans knowing that our job in the world is to be a steward and to be a supporter. If we are going to live up to our aspirational ideas, which we often do not do, we have to recognize that we are in this together, and we have to recognize that the perfect cannot ever get in the way of the good enough as we move forward. And I just want to, I guess, say as a state level politician in a country that is trying to find itself, that I believe at the end of the day, the United States will come out of the Trump years stronger than it was, because it forced us to rethink our relationships. It humbled us a little bit. And at the end of the day, it reminded us that we are part of an international community, part of a larger world. And I want to say, I believe in the next several years, we're going to be a little closer to back on track and doing our part as a good global citizen. So I just appreciate the question.
Thank you, Representative. We're going to get to our last question now, and that really gets to some of the specifics of the Build Back Better Act. How is the Build Back Better Act going to affect your states, the benefits of it, and particularly how it's addressing climate change?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll start with electric vehicles. I've heard of a lot of great conversations around that here. And I think when you look at long-term EV transitions, you're going to have national investment. So I think once we're able to get the Build Back Better Act across the finish line, that will be huge. A lot of states, myself included, we simply cannot do it on our own. We're able to do some of that locally in our urban areas, but not to scale at the rate that we need. Back to the panel I heard earlier, that national infrastructure is critical when you look at high capacity vehicles like your freight trucks. That's simply not going to happen without national investment. So I think that part is really, really huge. In North Carolina, we'll get a little over $100 million for EV infrastructure out of the infrastructure bill that already passed, more for transit as we look at reducing our carbon dependency, everything that we could possibly do to increase transit, and high capacity transit is also really, really helpful. But definitely the huge investments that we're going to get really, really will come out of the Build Back Better Act. And it's crucial for states. And not only is it crucial for states, we need to know that that funding is coming so that we can plan. Because when we talk about just transitions and all these other buzzwords, those things you cannot do overnight. They take a long time to get them done, and you can plan, but until you really get the funding to implement it, it is just a plan on a sheet of paper. So that is why the states really, really need this federal legislation, so that we get that infusion of investment that we need, so that we can really spark long-term change.
Short and briefly, since we're talking about states, I know that one, individually, states will set their own deadlines for meeting certain goals and standards. And mentioned earlier that Maryland set their goal for 2045, which is 5 years before the 2050 global mandates are set, or agreements have been set. So no, these ideas were set, and these mandates and these goals were set before Build Back Better. While we hoped and expected to have certain federal investments, we did this knowing that we were going to set them to try and work on it on our own. Now knowing that there would be resources coming from the federal government strategically placed for helping get out of fossil fuels related to our fleet vehicles from a state level. Baltimore County itself has already made a mandate that we're going to get rid of and cycle out our fossil fuel vehicles for electric vehicles. And with the Build Back Better plan, having a potential army of young folks working towards ending climate change and working towards assisting local jurisdictions, local governments, and the federal government in meeting our goals is only going to help us possibly reach our goals before 2045. I'm excited about that.
Great. For tribal nations, I could speak for my tribe. We are facing multiple apocalyptic challenges related to climate change. I'm having to relocate 2 villages to higher ground. The place where my ancestors signed a treaty with the United States is now underwater. We're under a current state of emergency due to sea level rise and a landslide that potentially could take out part of Highway 101, which is the only access road into our village. So this piece of legislation is going to go a long way to meet the needs, but I really want to emphasize and stress that we have a hole in the bucket, and climate change and the impacts are only going to intensify, and the public resources are limited. We must internationally and strategically end the fossil fuel industry and hold them accountable for the past wrongs. And so I can't emphasize that enough. The scale of this crisis is much larger than any pot of money, and it will take public-private partnerships. It will take holding industry accountable, because when it comes right down to it, our future of the planet and humanity is reduced nothing to more than a cost of doing business and profits. And so we must change that culture, but this is going to go a long way to help us and assist us in the short term, but we have to be together strategically for the long term.
I think the most exciting parts of Build Back Better, from my perspective, are the transformations to the 2 sectors that generate the most emissions: electricity and transportation. And Build Back Better funds those transformations in such a needed way. The funding to be able to transition to a balanced portfolio of solar and wind and battery storage, the funding to be able to have rebates at the individual customer level, so that somebody who's looking to replace their car will be able to choose an electric vehicle, will be able to get to that parity to have clean transportation and clean energy within the next decade. And that's what's so exciting about Build Back Better. And that's what makes it so important to pass this bill right now.
Thank you, everyone. Those are inspiring answers, excuse me. So I'd like to finish by passing it to Dominic Fangello. He's the co-president of Elected Officials to Protect America and the executive director.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to all of our panelists, both in person and online and in the United States. Each and every one of you, your passion, your commitment to service is so inspiring, and your depth of policy knowledge and your courage. And that's why we founded Elected Officials to Protect America, to connect, to inspire, and to organize elected officials across the United States from every level of office on the climate emergency, to ensure environmental justice, and to protect our land and waters. And our values are, we believe that elected officials are elected to serve and to be stewards of our communities, to be stewards of our nation and of our future, that times like the climate emergency require courageous leadership for us to step up. When no one else is solving a problem, it's up for us as elected officials to step up and solve those problems. And lastly, that we have tremendous power by joining together across municipal boundaries, across levels of government, and across states, and ultimately as a world, to join together with international cooperation to phase out fossil fuels, to ensure a just future, a fair, abundant, safe future for all people in all life. So we're excited to continue the work, the conversation. There's a lot of work to do, and so we invite everyone to participate with Elected Officials to Protect America. We're at protectingamerica.net. And thank you so much, Alex, for emceeing this press conference. Back to you.
Thank you, everyone. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out at protectingamerica.net or tweet at us. And we look forward to continuing the conversation in this extremely urgent and vital need to protect our planet's security, health, and prosperity.